Hi, Nick here with Tactically Custom with another ACR. I have Nick and Jesse from Defensive Elements. I just got done doing their first class of Anatomy of Structures, CQB course. So I have them on here to kind of talk about it and what it all means. So guys, I want to kind of go over, well, first introduce yourselves again. I know we've done other streams, but why don't you guys just briefly introduce yourself and Defensive Elements again.
Go ahead, Nick.
Okay. Hey, my name is Nick Humphreys. So Defensive Elements, obviously, it kind of changed starting of this year. Originally, all the training was done under Practically Tactical, the podcast that we do. And then we kind of moved that onto its own thing because the past 2 years have been very successful in growing in the training aspect. And then, teamed up with our good buddy Tim and have been now just working on training and doing classes through Defensive Elements. And the goal with Defensive Elements, I think, is to put on the classes that we as students have enjoyed or wanted, or the combination of both.
Yeah, and want to talk about this class, this Anatomy of Structures. So this is obviously a CQB package, if you will, that both have many hours in from another Alliance Police Department, Joe Wire over there. Kind of talk about what Anatomy of Structures is. Just give a kind of a brief 30,000 foot overview of what you guys were looking at doing with this class.
Jesse, you want to hit that?
Sure. So, I mean, basically, what we want to do is kind of change the perceived notion of what is CQB, right? Oftentimes when people hear it, they think of SWAT teams, they think of like the military running into places, right, and clearing large like structures with teams. But what we quickly realized through, our training path, it really breaks down to is just problem solving and decision making under stress, right? And what you quickly learn by going through, these type of classes is it benefits you in all sorts of ways. Right? It benefits you on how to maximize angles of attack with, or angles of exposure with angles of attack. But it also teaches you how to move in and around other people with firearms, right? How to problem solve, how to PID, which is, identify the targets, right? So there's a lot of things that kind of build upon this whole process. And what you quickly realize is it's more than just, right, like kitting up for the weekend or something like that. It really comes back to, again, just being a responsibly armed citizen and taking that next training path and kind of training in that 360-degree environment.
So I actually have a question for you, Nick, on this. So being through Joe's class, obviously, who, Joe's our mentor, and then our class, which is, the same package. When you look at all the things that are included in this type of training, where else do you actually get to work on so many different things in a class?
Yeah, and that's when I did Joe's 3-day program in Alliance, and then your guys. It is in a sense kind of brain overload because you are working on a lot of things at one time. Between getting online, weapon manipulation, and not just where is my weapon as opposed to somebody by me, but up on the catwalk, the people watching, what's around that. I mean, there's the instructors behind us. So there's a lot of different things that go on to that, and I've done a lot of defensive training on the flat range, and you're always facing the berm. And I think we've talked about this in some of our other classes. You're always just facing the berm, and you'll do weapon manipulation and some running around with other people, if you will, or movement with other people, but it's generally in a linear motion, where here we have that whole, like you guys say, 360-degree environment where we're able to put all of these skills together during that one run, not a piece here, a piece there, so you're really putting the skills to the test at that time, if you will, and building for that.
I mean, we work obviously accuracy, which we're running, rifles at close distances. We should be able to be extremely accurate at that, PIDing, decision making, understanding angles of exposure, working in or around other people, communication, decision making, direction of travel. Like all of those things are also, those parlay into being a concealed carrier every single day too. And it's one now it is more specific into regards, working procedures and stuff like that. But it's these types of classes, especially when structure or CQB classes are done right. There are so many things that you get to work in these classes that you don't get to work anywhere else, but also, work your training for everyday life is carrying a handgun as a concealed carry citizen.
Yeah, one of the things I've talked to some guys just at work and friends of mine, I've never used real life paper targets. Yours are photorealistic targets, both at Joe's and yours. Never in any of the other training scenarios have I done have there been that. So, you guys have a target where to me it looked like he had a short barrel shotgun. Well, it's just a bottle he's pointing at me. Does he deserve to get blown away? Hell no. But did I get trigger happy that last run? Hell yes, So it's taking that time and trying to, like you said, PID, and it's never put to the test like your guys' class or Joe's class was. Even the force on force concealed carry, the who are you with a gun class that you guys have, none of that stuff is ever put to the test until I've taken your guys' classes, which I've really enjoyed, and I've talked up, and I've made a big effort this year to do a lot of this stuff, because that's one of the things that I found was lacking in my training was the PID stuff, right? And the decision making. Everybody's waiting for that beep. All right, ready? Get on the low, ready. Beep. Pull up. Safety off. Boom, boom. Safety off. Down. That's not real life, but you get these training scars from doing it. And I've seen it when I was at Joe's, and even at your guys' class, I see some of that training scars that I have and trying to work through it. But yeah, those photorealistic targets, I tell you, and even the accuracy, we talk about the accuracy, right? It's literally that put him down right now, that small little area between the eyes to the nose. And then, that fish size right above the heart, it's not that ace, target or B size target where it's, huge. It's almost like an 8.5 by 11 where normally is an acceptable area. That's not the case. And like you said, when you're 3-5 yards on top of a target, you should be able to hit those small areas accurately.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. No. Am I muted? No.
Nope.
No, you're good.
Okay. Damn. I lost hearing myself in my own things, and now it's messing with me. Yeah. So accuracy standard, right? I think for this, what we often see, especially holding people to such a high accuracy standard, is someone will get like around in the mouth, right? And they're like, but that guy would have probably died, right? And it's like, yeah, but again, think about what we're asking you to do here. We're asking you to go into this house, right? No, there's no clock on you. There's no time limit. We're asking you to take a couple steps into the room, and then with your rifle and, whatever optic that you have, some of these dudes running like 1-6s, or with your aim point T2, right? To put 2 rounds into this paper target that's not shooting back at you right where you want them to go. And what we quickly see, right, is how hard is that for people? Now, is that something that we can definitely work on the square range and that we need to? Of course, right? But now you have the context of why we're working it, right? The thing about the square range is, again, we need that place, right? That's where we get these skills and we get to hone some of these skills. But you have to have the context behind what you're actually doing. If there's nothing to process, right, that's the downside of just doing square range training, is it's always a shoot target, right? It's always giving you the perfect presentation. That's what, if you come to like one of our handgun classes, what you quickly see is like we do things to try to early on incorporate the 360-degree environment, to early on think about what accuracy could look like, right? Because, again, maybe we're not talking about a full profile being able to see something. Maybe somebody's now ducked behind something, right? And you've only got a piece of them. So, again, this is why if we don't work this stuff in training, right, it just doesn't magically appear under stress, right? If we don't do this stuff now and hold ourselves to this highest professional standard, and that's on all the procedures, right? Mm-hmm. Well, then it doesn't just magically come. We know that under stress, some of this is going to degrade, right? We understand that, but that's why we train to such the high level of professionalism and keep such high standards on everything.
Yeah, I was kind of talking to Ernie about that too. we have, you guys are holding that high standard with everything that we do, because in real life, under stress, we hope that it doesn't, but the likelihood of things, that accuracy opening up is going to happen. But if we're, always holding that tight standard, it's the muscle memory, it's the training, it's the default. The brain should always default to that. We can hold those higher standards and hit what we need to hit. Backing up really quick, because I've taken some other CQB classes as well, which was more of opposing corner kind of military style. What is this CQB package considered? Does it have a name? Is it a hybrid of some things? What at a basic level, what is it kind of considered?
Well, go
ahead, Nick.
Okay. Well, I want to take it a step back, then I'll let you answer that question, Jesse. Is when you talk about and Jesse kind of talked about this at the beginning, and I think this is very important. When you start talking structure work or CQB, the context of what we do and why we're doing it is beyond important. Again, we can put on a CQB class, do military tactics, throw 8,000 people into a room, overwhelm it with force. Like, hey, cool. Does the military and what they do, the context of what they do and how they do it appropriate for them? Yes. We have to look, at stateside now. We have this thing called the U.S. Constitution. There's laws that we have to follow, and there's consequences here in the United States when somebody does something wrong. So the big thing that has to be talked about of this is the context of why we do what we do or teach what we teach is, again, go take a military CQB class or a kill house class. Hey, that's fun. That's cool. We can all have fun and do that stuff. But when we're actually talking about doing real work, imagine your worst day in your life, you have to get a rifle, move through a structure. That's a bad day. What is your, acceptable casualty rate? The military has one. I can tell you, at least for me, on that bad day, my acceptable rate is 0 because that's me.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one thing that we have to get out there is the context. People will be like, well, military stuff or, law enforcement stuff or civilian stuff, and everything has their own stuff. Again, you look at the SAS, Delta, Rangers, they all run different CQB packages because it's based on their missions and what they do. So this CQB package is, again, based on working here in the United States with the U.S. Constitution, where there's consequences if you mess up. And then there's also the consequences of if you don't do this stuff right, it's you're the one getting shot. And so I think that needs to be a big distinction for people that want to look at, our class or other types of classes, is make sure the context of the training that you're taking is actually applicable to you and what you do. So I kind of want to back that in and throw that in there. But then, Jesse, I'll turn over to you.
No, so I mean, kind of going back to your question, right? I guess the name for this type of CQB would be more of strong wall CQB, right? So what you'll quickly find, going through the different packages, right, is it's not really that different. You know what I mean? A guy's running the corners and the other, and what you'll find through both of them is that there's times when you're running opposing corners that you do strong wall CQB, and there's times when you're doing strong wall that you'll do opposing corners, right? So, again, it really just gets into the semantics. Like Nick said, I think what people need to understand about what you commonly see with CQB is, right, perfect CQB isn't these guys' mission. The mission is to go in and fucking, eliminate everybody in the house or whatever the case, right? Go and capture this dude. And what you find is through these teams working together, right, they come up with their own SOPs to things and things like that. And as that gets broken down, right, and they start to teach this context to citizenry, it doesn't scale well. And kind of what we've seen, being able to go through all of these different packages is what was working for the context of what the majority of us were doing, right? That's your basic patrol officer showing up on a residential. He's got to, clear the structure by himself, or maybe he gets a couple of his buddies to show up, right? Maybe that's you in the mall, trying to get out. Maybe that's you in your house, right? So what we needed was something that was scalable from one person all the way up to, 30 dudes under night vision kind of deal. So, yeah, looking at the package, obviously it's changed over the years from what we've started with. But it's been always trying to adapt to a better way. Like, again, it's by having principles, right? Understanding the principles of CQB, and then the priority of life, right? What is that? What is that for you? Your priority of life might be different than my priority of life, right? So I think by starting to incorporate all of these things, what you quickly see is we're starting to have just a systematic response, right? A heuristic response to being able to work through these problems. We're noticing, hey, it's just a series of problems, right, that we're running into. And through any class, right, like if you've been through Petty's vehicle CQB, you realize like it's this task versus priority going through. What's the priority, right? And then what's all the task I have to get done to like be able to get through that. We've come up with having procedures for basically everything we do, right? And what that allows is as soon as you come up to a problem, you just have a procedure for it. And then you're determining the role. And what we realize is, again, keeping with these principles of violence of action, right, that being able to solve these problems sooner and more efficiently led to more pressure on the structure, right? And it led to guys giving up faster. How are we testing this? Force on force, of course, right? So just being able to get in there and pressure test this stuff.
Yeah, one of the things that you guys have brought up a couple of times is procedures. And one of the things that this class does and what you guys teach is the procedures. And there's procedures for anything, whether it's door procedure, is it a push door, pull door, and you give the rules for those. Going down just a simple hallway, we talk about shapes, which I want to talk about here in a little bit. But there's room procedures, a threat procedure. I mean, there's procedures for everything. And as you build on that, there's not many differences that change. So it's just a little subtle thing. So like you said, Jesse, if you're not having to process that, we talk about, and Nick, I think you talked about this when you're talking with one of the centrifuge guys back in, I think it was January, about that Rolodex in your head. You're constantly doing it. So if those basic procedures are always done and not hugely different from each other, that Rolodex is just grabbing that. You're not even processing that at that point. Now you're looking further and solving those problems further along, and you're able to PID, identify targets sooner, easier, find targets. I know one of the things we talk about is everything changes in the dark, and at Joe's class, everything changes. You get into that tunnel vision, and it's trying to pick up those things. So that's one of the things that will always stick with me that you talked about, Nick, is that Rolodex and just getting it as part of that muscle memory or mind memory. So it's just natural and you can focus on other things.
I mean, we have, as you're pretty early on in the CQ package. There is a procedure for everything. I mean, we're talking breaching doors, flashbangs, you name it. There is procedure for it. Because again, here's the big thing is like, how do you get 30 people on the same page? Well, if you have a procedure for everything, it's all there. And I mean, there's as Jessica talked about, like we actually do run strong wall, but we have a procedure for going to opposing corners in certain situations. It has to be adaptable. But then also the CQB package makes people become problem solvers. Like, I think that's the beautiful thing about this is I think Tim at the class talked about, like, we're looking for problem solvers in this stuff, because when you start solving problems, as Jesse talked about, that's just pressure on a structure. And I can tell you, as being a role player and force on force on the other end of it, when you got those dudes that are just rolling through problems, knocking them out, and I know where they're coming from, I know exactly what they're doing. And I can tell you it's rough. It's rough being a role player on the other end of it.
Now, one of the things that I wanted to cover again, because when I tell people that, I'm going to go do the CQB training and this and that, they're like, you're going to go join a SWAT team and, you're going to go and take down buildings. And it's just not what it is. Go through in your guys' mind. Again, we talked about solving problems and everything, but why should a normal Joe Blow who's not in the military, not in the police, why should the normal Joe Blow take this class, in your feelings?
Yeah. So again, man, it's problem solving under pressure, right? So I think everybody, especially if you're, a responsibly armed citizen, right, you should understand what decisions you think you would make under stress. So for a classic example, right, the bump in the night, you hear something in your downstairs, right? You grab your handgun or whatever the case, your rifle, and you go down to investigate. What does that actually look like? Have you actually ever seen that? Have you ever had, an instructor stand behind you while you've tried to clear that space, or while somebody else is in the house wanting to do your harm, right? I think everybody has this envision of what that looks like and what they would actually do, right? And it's not until you're in that situation where you're like, oh, wow, I made all the wrong decisions, right? And it's because, a couple of reasons, right? Why is that? Well, it's where do we see CQB? What does it look like? It's TV and movies, and it's the guys rushing through the room and boom, 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 boom. And I think back to even my military career, and that's what our CQB looked like, right? And I'm like, oh, well, yeah, it worked 40% of the time, right? Most of the time it was people just, again, we talk about ways that people give up, and what I was lucky enough is most of the time we ran into people that didn't want to fight, right? But when we start getting into people that are actually bunkered down, that are actually opposed, and what that starts to look like, you start to see that every angle, every step that you take matters, right? Every movement in the house opens you up to a new angle. Every door that you reach is another problem that you have to solve, right? And you quickly see that just even going through a few rooms of a house, how mentally taxing that is to be able to process everything. What we see by looking at the TV medium news, right, is people are shooting the wrong people, right? How many times have we heard of the daughter breaking back into the house, right, because she snuck out, and then the dad shooting her because why? He didn't understand what positively identifying was, right? He just got nervous. He actually seen something, right? He didn't understand actually preparing to see something, what violence of action looked like, right? Then knowing the shoot process, right? The shoot procedure of oh, I've actually got to look and identify this person before I just, decide to start shooting. And then, like I said, even getting down to what the accuracy portion of that looks like. What do we commonly see in force on force or on just paper targetry? Where are those rounds actually going? And what kind of liability is that if they're not going into the person, right? So now we're throwing them who God knows where. So, again, it's so many multiple things that it not only shows you, again, weapons manipulation, right? That's critical. And what we see is people with good weapons manipulation handle this stuff a lot better because they understand where the gun needs to go in time and space. People that aren't confident on mounting the gun from those different positions, right? They're a little more lax. They're trying to live life through that tube. So they're already cutting down a lot of that vision and, their processing ability. Not understanding angles of exposure and attack, right? How many times, if you didn't understand shapes and things like that, would you have turned your back on things that could have been a potential threat, right? So again, it starts to make you identify areas that are danger areas in your space and time, right? Areas that need more attention. It shows you how to move in and around other people. It shows you how to communicate with people, right? How many times did you run up to a problem and just freeze for a second of and again, it's only in training by having these experiences that you have that Rolodex to fall back on, right? If you're not running that game trail every day, there's no way it's going to turn into a road for you. And again, if you have to go down that path, it's going down it for the first time and thinking back, you look at your first experience. I look at my first experience. I've seen Nick's first experience, right? None of us were making great decisions in the beginning, but all of us came from what would be a higher level of knowledge on this, right? So again, I think this is valuable for anybody. It's not just valuable for, the guys that are the super concealed carriers or whatever. You take somebody who Kelly was in this class, it was just a mom who's hey, I also own a firearm. I carry this sometimes. I want to be able to protect my family, right? If he's away or whatever the case, like from, a home defense standpoint. So I think there's just tons and tons of benefits to a program like this far over like just, standard shooting and
yeah.
like
So something to add to what Jesse's talking about is, when people look at this class and be like, well, it starts out like 2-man. I'm never going to be with somebody, so I should do a 1-man class. And that's not the proper thing, because I can tell you, like, especially in early on in our structure CQB training, me and Jesse, we did 1-man stuff first. The problem with that is when you're 1-man, every problem is yours. Like, again, think about hitting like MTAC by yourself and work in that hallway, right? Like that's a lot for one person taking initial training. So when we start with 2-man, okay, guess what? Those problems are cut in half now. You have another angle of attack to cover an angle of exposure. So you can start to learn the fundamentals of this. Then once you progress through the package, personally, I say you take a 2-man a couple of times, you take a 4-man, then you can go take a 1-man. Because you have all these procedures down. The biggest part, as Jessica talked about, is task versus priority. Understanding all the angles of exposure. What's the most important one? Okay, as a 1-man, then I have to prioritize that. If you go in just doing 1-man stuff and there's so many problems all the time to handle, can you really, learn this stuff enough to actually start to learn to prioritize angles of exposure? And then, how do we stack angles of exposure to combine them so our one angle attack covers, multiple angles of exposure? This stuff parlays down to the 1-man type of stuff, but learning it early on, it works much better in 2-man. Because again, it's half the workload that you can start to actually learn the procedures, get foundational level skills to then apply this in 1-man.
Yeah, and I want to plug really quick your guys' podcast, Practically Tactical, because you guys really dive deep into a lot of videos on this and really go into the angles of exposure, angles of attack, shapes, and everything, and walk people through. So, anybody listening, it's on Patreon. It's $9 now, Nick. Is that what it is?
$9 a month.
Well worth it. I mean, you guys have taken multiple classes. You guys talk about those classes as well, but even getting into some of the nuances of this stuff that we could be on here for hours talking about.
I mean, next week we actually have a neuroscience researcher on the show talking about training. Like that's going to be an exciting stuff. Because again, it's all about why do we do what we do. That's what all this stuff's about.
One of the things that I was thinking about as you guys were talking here is training building blocks and not knowing what you know and things of that nature. And just as Jesse was saying, just a normal armed citizen, a responsible armed citizen. I kind of look at it as that class I took with you guys, that Who Are You With a Gun, was kind of my first exposure to true force on force, true decision making, which then opened up to my eyes like, I need to learn a lot more. Here's where my training path needs to go. One of the runs, or a couple of the runs, were kind of that bump in the night type of situation, which a lot of us may run into more so than just going and clearing a structure. It's clearing my house if I heard a bump of the night to get my kids out of the house to safety or whatever it may be. And that kind of opened my eyes. And then I look at this as kind of like that second step, right? That's what's going to help me.
Well, so here's a question for you. Had you taken your CQB classes and then the Who Are You With a Gun, how much better do you think you would have done?
Some of the runs, actually probably a lot differently. I think it would be a lot better.
Well, I mean, like, we talk about PID, like noticing all this stuff, noticing stuff on people, like understanding angles. Like, so you think about, like, you took the CQB class, but now when you look back to that class, how many of those, again, everyday normal could happen in real life scenarios would the CQB class have helped you with?
Oh yeah. And it's kind of like that eye opener. And some people just need to see that. And we've talked about this before, Nick, where some people digress and some people progress through their training. Right. And you got to get kicked in the ass a couple times and you have to learn from that, and I look back at Joe's class. I got kicked in the ass quite a bit, and especially that second day, but it's made me hungry to learn this and get better and go. And that's what you can't let failures. And Nick, I know you have a good saying on this, but you can't let your failures just define who you are and just quit. you got to push through that.
That's the only way you learn. Like me and Jesse didn't get, pretty dang good at CQB by just showing up to like one class, just the basic shoot house class and doing that once and being like, well, we messed all it up, but we got it. It's like, it took repetitive failures to get really good at this stuff. And that's what it takes to learn. Like if anyone is ever scared of like, well, I want to show up and, look bad or whatever. It's like, bro, you're going to, we looked bad starting out. Everybody looks bad starting out. You're learning something new. No one ever just walks in and is like, got it.
Yeah.
No, but that should be like a major clue for your CQB class, right? Like if you walk in and it's your first time doing CQB and they're like, brah, that is how it's done. If Navy SEAL Team 6 needed an extra member, you would be on their team tomorrow, right? Like, because there's definitely those classes, it took having someone like Joe look at, again, a guy out of the Army, like I thought like for sure, oh, I've got this, and being like, well, that was all fucked up. So if let's try that again, maybe just like slow it way down. And don't try to kill everything in the room and everything else. Like if we could just take it everywhere back to step one. And it was like, oh, okay. And like Dick said, man, just coming back and back and back and learning like, because what you quickly realize is like, the procedures are pretty simple, right? They have to be because, again, we're trying to just do it on the fly under stress. So, but what you quickly learn is there's a lot of nuance to the procedures, right? There's a lot of like, oh, this is why it has to be perfect. And it's not until, again, you get through the whole level of context. It's hard in the beginning, especially with building blocks, even harder when you've had other CQB, right? To just trust the process coming through of like, oh, okay, like you want me to do what? Like, but I've always done this. And it's like, just give it a second. It's going to make sense, And then in the end, you're like, oh my God, this makes so much more sense. Like, why weren't we just doing it? Like, why didn't we just have answers and procedures to like all the things? And then we would just all be on the same page. Yeah. And then quickly from there, like, what it gives you is a metric to be able to track your progression, right? Is like, oh my God, like in the beginning, like I was having a real hard time remembering who had the barrel release on the inside of the L or the top of a T, right? And then it's like, as you start to progress, you don't even think about the shapes like that anymore, right? Like you're not even thinking about where your muzzle actually needs to be. You just are so comfortable with getting it into the correct position that it's there, right? And you're just identifying the door before you get to the door. So it's a natural process, right? It's not that you're getting to the door and like, oh shit, which one of us is this? Like you have to go through those building blocks at first, right? To be able to then get to that level. And, obviously we use the reference of like driving a car, like when you first started driving a car, had to pay attention to all the shit. Like now, like you just driving, cell phone in the hand, windows down, music on. And it's the same way with this type of stuff. It just takes, again, coming back to these types of classes, putting yourself into that type of decision-making training.
Yeah. And, the skills, when we've kind of talked about some of this here, basic skill level is what a lot of people need. They don't need to be master marksmen or anything like that because there, like you were saying before, there is no time limit, right? It's slow is actually very good. Walking, not necessarily crawling, but walking, just slow, picking your spots, hitting, there is no time. You guys aren't back there with shot clocks. So what's when somebody signs up for this class, what are your guys' expectation of a skill? Like where should they be or what should they need to know to do?
Well, I think the beautiful thing with this class is, again, so we have a board that we track all this stuff at, and, it's not meant to demean anybody or it's to show you the things you need to work on and where you compare it to your classmates. Like that's it. But for this class, like think about Kelly, like she hasn't taken a rifle class. She took this and ran a rifle. She did it safe. She moved at the pace that she could make decisions at. Like I'm not really too hung up on the firearms manipulation stuff. Like, you have to know and understand, the firearm responsibility rules, firearm rules, whatever you want to call them. We call them responsibility rules. Like, I mean, those have to be ingrained because again, we're talking about being in and around other people with live guns. Like that has to be there. But other than that, like, I just need you to show up, be willing to learn. And if you can move at the pace you can make decisions at, we can work with that. The speed will come. Again, like, so many people get caught up in this like going fast stuff. And it's like, if you can't do it slow, you can't do it fast. That it doesn't like reminded me of Scott, our SWAT instructor guy from the NRA class right there, Jesse. Like, go watch that AAR. The guy was like, I don't shoot good because I'm not moving. It's like, oh yeah, that's how it works. But if someone, long as they can safely run a rifle and they're open to learning, they have an open mind about it, and they can move at the pace, dude, that's all you need. Because the class will show you everything you need to work on after that.
Yeah, you guys, we did. You guys said about trusting the process, and other guys who have taken different CQBs, and I don't want to say it's not taught in a conventional way, but I know there's this argument: do you teach room procedure before door procedures, or door before room, and this and that, and you don't flood us with all the information, which is great, right? We just practice the room procedure, or we practice just the door procedure, we practice shapes, but then you do it in a way so we can practice multiple things at one time out in the shoot house or out, around that structure. But you're giving it that lecture to us a bit at a time, and you have to.
Well, there's a reason for it. Me and Jesse have both been to classes where they front load you with everything, and then your first run is doing 80% of that.
Yeah.
How do you think that goes?
Yeah, and it's not good at all.
No, you have to, again, so it's about reps. So like if I give someone all 4 door procedures at the beginning, and on their first run, they do 8 doors and all procedures twice, how many good reps do they actually get on those door procedures?
Yeah.
So it has to be about not just what, like, again, if me and Jesse could do this, a class, and we could get through whatever we wanted, like, we would, give everything. We're going to have, shot shoot procedures on the first door, all this type of stuff. But it's not about what we want or showing off the CQB or doing badass shit. It's about the student. And you have them for 2 or 3 days. Like, that's not a whole lot of time. Like, we put in time at classes. Like, if we can put in 40 hours in 3 days, we'll do it. Because it's about the student, but it's about having a good rep on everything. Because if we come there and you do 800 different things, you left not knowing any of them.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that I was actually surprised in how far we got with this class, because again, Joe's was a 3-day class. This was a 2-day class, and it was a long 2-day class, which was great. But when you present it that way, you have to give yourself to you guys, if you will, or to the process, and just trust that you will get us there, right? You're giving us that information so you don't front load us. And then all of a sudden there's just that aha moment, and then boom, we're running, we're going, right? And we got to shot shoot the second day, which was great, and things of that nature. And we were really, really going. So that was just one of the things I want to stress as we're doing classes like this, is you just have to trust that we're getting somewhere. Talk about briefly kind of the principles of CQB with this package, kind of what they are, and because again, we talk about procedures, but there's principles that also tie to this. So talk about the principles of the CQB that we're doing.
Sure. We can go through them, right? Like principle 1, get as many guns into the fight as possible, right? And again, it sounds self-explanatory of like, hey, if we're showing up to a gunfight, you want as many there as you can have. But it breaks down further than that, right? It's also within the procedures, right? We don't want to take any space that we can and take it unnecessarily a one-on-one gunfight, right? So if we can get multiple guns into that space, that angle of exposure, we want to be doing it, right? Just more efficient. So this leads into principle number 2, which is support your partner, right? Again, throughout this, we have to support our partner. We do this in a couple of different ways, right? It's not just, gunfighting with them, right? It's also communication. It's nonverbal communication. I think you quickly see this, right? like throughout the class, just how your body language is and your mannerisms, right? Having confidence in these procedures, having confidence in your weapons manipulation, right? All of this is ways that you're supporting your partner, right? If you're in the doorway, you've got nothing. How do I support my partner, right? Like getting that muzzle down so that he can go on with his job, right? Again, this is how we're solving problems in an efficient manner. So, again, we want to get as many guns into the fight as possible, support our partner. We need to deal with threats by priority, right? And again, we break down what those priorities are and the subcategories of those priorities. And basically what those priorities are the things that we need to deal with, right? We've been talking about kind of this task versus priority, and we're breaking down what that priority is. And then the last one is violence of action. And I think this one is the hardest for people to conceptualize in the beginning, right? Because again, they think of it as speed. But speed isn't a tactic. It's not a goal in of itself. It's just a byproduct of efficiency. So, and that comes from John Chapman. So like what we're trying to do is we're trying to solve the problems in a most efficient manner, right? By keeping as many guns into the fight as possible, supporting our partner throughout, and putting pressure on that structure, right? And, by having an answer to all of these problems, we get the opposing force to quit, and we get them to do that in a couple of different ways, right? We can get them to just give up, right? We come in and they're like, oh, dude, these dudes look too badass. Like, I don't want to fuck with this today. I just give up. Or by, again, going in and applying these fundamentals of pressure and accuracy and everything else and shutting it down as quickly as possible. And I think by having these principles, right, it allows you to start to look at everything, by having these principles. When I went to vehicle CQB, I'm like, oh my God, this fits these principles, right? Like, this is all, it's all tying together, and it starts to make you look at everything else like, well, that doesn't look great, right? Like that's putting me and just myself in danger. That doesn't seem like a very fair team thing here. So it starts to allow you to mold kind of what you want out of a package.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the bigger differences between some of those other packages is getting more guns into the fight. Again, and the violence of action. When I was there, at first, like you said, that's what most people struggle with, right? And I was always speed, just everything just speed, and it's not speed. It's part of that problem solving, right? Knowing the procedures, getting to your and we talked about this, just taking that corner, taking that, into your corner in the door procedure. And it's a lot different than pieing. A lot of times I compare it to pieing. Pieing, you're keep inching, or you can pie fast, but you keep giving more of yourself up. Where if in this particular process in the CQB program, your violence of action, you just take that corner, and it's much more efficient in my eyes, and especially when you're looking at it as it's me and I have zero casualties because I need to be here. I see that as much more effective, myself.
Well, rule number one, again, if I'm working with a teammate and I'm the one pieing, what can my partner do?
Just watch you.
Yeah.
You look
good
good,
luck, buddy.
You look good.
Versus, again, we have these procedures to where, okay, how do we put two guns in that space together at the same time? Like, makes a little bit more sense,
Yep. So one of the things we talk about too, as far as big difference between flat range stuff and what we're doing here at the CQB is getting online. And I know this is a big struggle for a lot of these types of classes, and what does that mean? So, everybody knows on the flat range, it's get online. Everybody line up on the 5-yard line or on the 7, on the 10, rifles down the range, getting ready. Getting online is a lot different, in real life applications. So, you guys did some stuff throughout the first day where we're kind of had to get online with B. We had 2 different lines, right? And we were facing opposite directions, and we had to, again, work multiple things: weapon manipulation, getting to our partner, getting online, and getting on target. So what have you kind of seen within the classes? I mean, am I right where this is kind of one of the things that needs a lot of work on, or people need to understand what truly getting online means, or what have you guys seen?
Yeah, man. I mean, 100%, right? Like you said, on the flat range, that's set for you. It's line up on the 10-yard line. We're all shoulder to shoulder. There's, all the muzzles are downrange, right? As we start to work like the 360-degree environment, you start to see like, oh, I might be not exactly online with this person. There might be a person forward back of me, right? So again, it goes into those life rules, right? Of knowing your target, its background, its foreground, everything in between. But what we have to ensure is another way that we're supporting our partner. And again, like this doesn't necessarily mean the person that's there gunfighting, your police partner, right? This could be your wife, your child, is that if we're going to guns, we've got to get that muzzle then past the meat. What we've seen and what I'm sure you've seen by going through these classes is that when the fight's happening, people want to get to that, right? They want to react to that. So then they're just turning with the muzzle. What we've got to get the discipline to have is to look, right, be able to manage that muzzle and then figure out where is the safe direction that muzzle can go. We just can't be turning in time and space. Again, scalability, right? If we're dealing with more people, but just in the grand atmosphere of life, like people being in and around you. Again, think of any place that this gunfight's going to happen. There's probably going to be other people there. If not only, just neighbors, houses, whatever the case. So, again, what we've got to get people in the habit of doing is being able to understand that they've got to manage that muzzle, and then they've got to be able to get that muzzle past the meat, right? So what we do is we set what definitively online is, right? And again, holding high professional standards. Because what we can show you through tons of video is what starts to happen is by just a step back, right? When you're in close confines and it's a two-way range and you've got somebody else there, it's real easy for someone to get hit, to move, right? Do something to where they duck in front of your muzzle. And again, no one cares that if you've like, hey man, we stopped the bad guy, but I also shot my partner, or I also shot my wife in the back of the head. We stopped the home intruder, murdered her at the same time, right? So again, it's just having that higher level of skills to be able to, and it's not even really higher level, it's the rudimentary skills of being able to understand where that muzzle needs to be in time and space, and to be able to move yourself to make sure that you're not putting anybody else at risk when you are taking that shot or bringing that gun up.
Yeah, one of the things too that, because that was a common thing, I know that came up in our class a little bit, but especially now with all these shorter pistol rifles that a lot of people are having, that getting online becomes more and more important because they're 10.5-inch barrel. It's not a 16-inch barrel, so it's even shorter now. So it's just more and more important to recognize that. Like you said, it's not just the guy shooting next to you with you, it's your wife, your kid. I mean, it's just again ingraining that into that Rolodex, so it's just second nature.
Yeah, same thing with the handgun, right? Like, in fact, manipulation more important. What we commonly see with the handgun is people have a tendency to flag themselves because it's easier to compress that gun in, but then they're doing like this number to open doors and all that stuff. So again, just having these basic ready and carry positions, being fluent on these ready and carry positions to understand where that gun needs to go, right? In just time and space.
So then going through this too, we talked about shapes a little bit from what we were saying, and like I said, you with the podcast that you guys have done, and Nick even has this nice whiteboard and moving different figures around and stuff like that to really go through shapes. But it kind of breaks down into in a sense, there's 4 shapes. The L, a bottom of a T. So if you thought of a T coming through the bottom, the bottom leg, a top of the T, which would be coming from either side of the top of the T, and then a 4-way, which realistically the 4-way is a T. And that was kind of what was getting to me at the beginning, was trying to problem solve everything in the whole step of the way, not what's in front of me, the whole problem. And so I had to really rein in, and I felt much better, during your class of reining that in, especially how you guys taught it, because we had 3 different stations set up, which was really cool, where we actually had the definitive shape with mats in the open area of MTAC. So you started there with the definitive shape. Then we went into the shoot house, if you will, of MTAC, where we were in the hallway. And then you took us into a room with some furniture to go over that shape, because everything's a shape that we do. And the four-ways too. The four-ways with another program really screwed me up. It was just the death trap, right? But with this particular procedure, just handling it like the bottom of a T, it's just a T. It makes it a little bit, I mean, there's still nuances that go along with it, but it's not just a death trap and scares everybody. There's the procedure to handle it and move forward from there. So that was really cool what you guys did with that. So kind of talk with your process and kind of how you saw those shapes and helping people understand that.
Well, just to throw in one thing too, is like CQB is inherently dangerous. Like there's no like, all right, if I do this perfect, well, you know, I'm going to win. It's like, dude, this is CQB. We're just trying to stack as many percentage of advantages we can get. Again, thinking of a gut fight, like, man, if I do everything perfect, I might get 20% out of this. And it's like, well, that's better than 5, you know? So, you know, all this stuff is inherently dangerous. So it's again, why we have those principles to give us the most advantage. But when we start looking at shapes, again, this often gets thrown into like the CQB structure work stuff, but again, you can expand this out to, you know, like parking lots, your streets and all this stuff. So it's really breaking down what angles of exposure and where are they at. If I have an angle of exposure to my left, an angle of exposure to my right, and that's all there is, then guess what? It's just a bottom of a T. I know that there's one this way and one this way. We have 2 guns, so it would make sense to let's both put a gun on each angle of exposure. And then, you know, it's just a way to, again, keep things simple, because we got to keep people all on the same page, and then just give a procedure for the shape. You know, again, as we all know, it sounds so easy of like, no, yeah, the shape, got it, nailed it. Yeah, that's easy. Then it's like coming in and like, oh, okay, yeah.
Brain freeze.
And again, as you go more along down these, there could be 3 angles of exposure one way and one another way. Well, it's still bottom of a T. I'm just now responsible for these 3. Again, you can't introduce those in the beginning because you're just going to overload this stuff. Yeah. But again, it's a way that now, again, as Jesse talked about, of scalability, not just in regards to people, but then scalability in regards to the amount of problems that we have. So when we start breaking this down to shapes, it makes it a very easy way to have procedures for them. Because if it's, you know, our CQB isn't like a playbook. Because often you see like, you know, like playbooks, like, well, if the room's like this, then you all do this. But if it's like this, then you do this. How do you get 4 people? How do you get 2 people to make sure you're on the same page every single time? So that's why when we start breaking our world down into shapes, it makes it very easy to get multiple people on the same page. Or as an individual person, if I'm working at a bottom of a T, okay, what's my direction of travel going to be? And so I know as myself as a one guy, like I'm going to take what I might feel like to be the biggest priority, but then I know that I'm also responsible for the other part. Yeah. So that's why shape-based CQB works so incredibly well, because it's just where are the angles of exposure at? What shape is that? Cool. Hey, we have this procedure for it. Let's go do it. Next problem.
Yeah, when we talk about angles of attack and exposure, so just to break that down too, an angle of attack would be, you know, basically me, my gun, that or what I'm going to be covering, that's my angle of attack. Angle of exposure, that's where something or somebody could be, whether it's a doorway, a bookcase, anything like that. That is a angle of exposure. So when we talk about angles of attack, angles of exposure, there's always going to be exposures that where people could be coming from or people are that could fire at us. We want to cancel that out with us putting a gun in that direction, as many guns, again, going back to that principle, as many guns as possible on that angle of exposure. I got that right, correct? That's
yes, absolutely.
So, and with all of these procedures, whether it's, you know, the basically the door procedures, we always have the assigned roles, so you know what people are doing, especially as you stack people. And we call those breacher and assaulter, and each person, if you will, the breacher or the assaulter on that has their role and their procedure to do. And again, I didn't want to go too deep in the woods here of everybody's procedure and what they're responsible for. But in the 2-man that we're doing, you know, you have that breacher who's in essence is the guy that's opening the door, the guy or girl that's opening the door. And the assaulter is the person that's going to observe that room and make the first move into that room. In its basic form, that's how I see that. And that goes into when you look at the shapes going down hallways or even in the room and going into room procedure, you always have defined roles as that going. Again, those roles can change depending on the situation, and as we learn just in this, as we go on. But that, in essence, we have those roles, and that's again breaking it down. Is that it's all about principles, it's all about procedures and roles. So you can solve these problems more efficiently.
Well, efficiency is the biggest key. So, like, if me and Jesse come up to the door and he's the assaulter, so if I'm the breacher, he knows what his role is and he can do that. I know what my role is and I can do that. Versus if we show up to the door, we kind of don't know what we're going to do, but then we're going to talk through it. You know, how many things can one person do at one time and be very efficient at it?
Yeah.
Just one thing. You know, there's no point in him coming up to the door and be like, all right, I'm going to breach the door. I'm going to assault the door. You do something else. Like, you know, what's the efficiency of that? If he knows his role and I know my role at a door or a shape or a procedure, it's just all about efficiency. If we know what our tasks are and what we have to accomplish to do our tasks correctly, it's just way more efficient. Again, we've seen some funny stuff on doors. Like,
well, and there's that, and I forget what you guys call it, the clock, right? When you start to come up to a structure, the
relative superiority clock.
Thank you. Yep. You know, and that clock is where the opposing force or the people inside that house, when they start to know you're there. And if you get up to that, even that first door, or the second, or any door that you're going into, and you're like, oh shit, okay, what are you going to do? And you're sitting out there, and especially if it's at night, your lights are shining around, and like, hey, okay, what are we going to do? You're the guy, you're going to open the door, you know, and that goes back to that whole violence of action thing. It all intertwines, right? Of knowing your procedure, knowing your job, getting there, open that door and take it, as opposed to trying to figure it out.
well, I know me and Jesse both have funny stories so at Alliance, I don't think we did one last year, but the couple years before that, we did force on force CQB at Alliance, and you could show up and run any CQB package you wanted to do. And there were a couple people who showed up who had no CQB training at all. And I can tell you, for me and Jesse, the funniest thing is being in a room and somebody coming up to the door and not knowing what to do. Like, it's the funniest thing until like it's like 5 minutes in and they're discussing what everyone's gonna do, and it's like cold out and it's snowing, and you just want them to come into the room so we can get this scenario over with. But that's real life. If you don't have a plan for this type of stuff and a procedure on how to do something, imagine standing outside of a door for 5 minutes. Like, that sounds stupid. But again, think about we talk about the differences of square range training versus, 360 degree training. How many times you went through a door thinking someone might be on the other side trying to kill me? Mm-hmm. That changes the doors a lot.
Oh yeah. And I talked about this after I did your force on force, and how for like the next week, like I was like, why am I going out in public? Like, everybody's going to kill you. Like, you're ready to shoot. Like, all right, that guy's doing something weird. He has a gun. He's ready to come get me. Like, it was just a hectic week, right? And then you can kind of calm back down. And then same thing when I did shows. Every time I open a door, now I'm in the commercial roofing business, so I go through a lot of doors. I'm like, open the door. All right, who's there? Okay, all right, we're good. It's just always in your mind, and it's funny because I see shapes everywhere now. And that first week or two of Joe's, and then right after yours, so literally for like 2 weeks, I'm just mumbling to myself, all right, bottom of the T, okay, we're going there, now we're going an L. I'm just kind of running through it in my head, and I had one customer like, what were you saying? Never mind, don't worry about it. Like, we're good here. So it was kind of funny with that, but again, it boils down to just the efficiency, and that's what I love about the package here, is everything that you guys taught and we do just makes it very efficient.
Yeah, well, and it's setting you up to fight, right? Like, what I seen through so many like CQBs, and again, we're kind of talking doors here, but they would have me like coming up to the side of the door, you know, in like a single stack formation. And again, like the context of that was they were clearing a lot of like mud huts and like, you know, concrete structures overseas. So the walls offered a little more ballistic protection than what we're seeing residential, right? And, you know, so then you don't really have mechanical efficiency on the door to open it. And then what happens? You open the door and it's like, all right, I don't see anything but the door. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to pie across this door. Damn it, he got me. Okay, well, that wasn't good. I'm gonna try that again, but slower. Hold on. No. Okay, no, definitely not the. Now I'm gonna change elevation. That'll get him. Here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna change my elevation one time. I'm gonna go lower so I can change my, you know, because again, anytime we go lower, that's gonna help our shooting ability for sure. And where I'm gonna put these good. Oh no, still not. You know, and this is what they don't get is like this pine. I still have to take that space back. Here's the real shitty part of like someone. They might not be in the same spot, right? Yeah. So now they've moved, and now where you thought they were, they weren't. And so what I quickly seen from like just even having the process of doors is like, who's got first look into the room? Again, we're allowing the environment to dictate what our role is. So there's no question when we get up to the door determines what does what on the door. Now, as a crafty assaulter, can I figure out going down the hallway and shit, how I can line up to like maybe be in the assaulter position? Yes, this is the higher level of like.
He's a cheater. He will literally call out a hold. It's like, I'll stop. Be like, oh man, what did he pick up? And he'll move spots. So he's the assaulter on the door. I'm like, you piece of crap.
Well, that's what I've quickly learned too. And talking with Heath, you know, he jokes around and says that stuff too. You know, like. You can always, you know, you can figure out a way to be the assaulter as you get better at this. Because, I mean, myself, I love being the assaulter, and
we all do. It's
certain times it's like, I'm going to call a shoot thing here just so I take over. Now it's my door.
Oh, he's done that. Like, how much better are you now looking into that room quickly to process that room, right? Like, and this is it's not only a game for, you know, again, between you and your buddy to be able to get the most shots off in the class kind of deal, but it's also, again, driving home these fundamentals of, man, I actually need to be looking into this space quickly, right? This is my job in here. And if he sees it first, right, that was his job. That's good, right? We should be looking deep into the space down the hallway. I want Nick to be able to pick up just a tiny amount of a target in an open door at the end of the target, you know? And again, like that's the level because that's real life, right? We're not training you to come through the house and find paper targets, you know, sitting in target stands. We're training you to be looking for that tip of a shoe hanging out that a dude ducked behind your couch to hide as you came down the stairs, right? Like this is the level that we're teaching you to, again, look and scan and be able to identify and process. And, you know, again, it becomes taxing in the beginning, but the way that you get better at doing this is just doing it.
Yeah, there was that one run where you guys kind of snuck a little, I think it was a hand, if I could remember correctly, and on that bookcase to see who caught it. And, you know, and watch another run. Some people didn't catch it at all. Some people caught it from outside the door. Some people caught it from inside the room. You know, and you guys had it set dead at 12 o'clock to catch that from the outside of the room. So it kind of seeing what you can pick up. And like you said, Jesse, because that was one of the things that kind of came up in our class a couple of times is what if somebody's standing there and then pops up as you take your corner? And it's like, well, you let the room breathe a little bit. You don't, you know, the violence of action isn't just opening the door and going. It's letting that room breathe, identifying what you need to do. Again, it all depends on priority of life too.
Right.
I mean, obviously, if somebody's screaming, he has a gun to my head, it changes things. But if you can let the room breathe, let it breathe, and you know, take it in and then go type of thing.
Absolutely. If the priority of life is me, right? Like, who does that benefit? Me just rushing in there and being like, no, it looks cooler if I run through the door faster, you know? Again, being able to have those priorities of life, being able to say, all right, you know, hey, man, there's nothing calling me to get into this room, maybe taking a second, because what you quickly see by doing that, again, how much of that room can you clear up from the outside? To be able to get into there. So again, it all comes back to having these procedures, right? Having the principles to fall back on. It's what makes the problem solving easier as it comes to you, helps that processor.
Yeah, one of the things that I use that for, because my big thing, I kept telling myself, I'm going to walk slowly. I'm going to do these runs slowly. But you quickly find, I think I'm walking, but I'm like running through this stuff, right? You're just amped up with energy. So one of the things that I've used that door procedure for is for me to take my breath to, okay, stop, slow down, and I was with Ernie at your guys' class, and those of you out there who know Ernie, he runs through everything. I'm surprised he would have a magazine. I mean, his 20 rounds are gone in the first door, first room, whatever it may be. And we actually did very well together. I was very happy. I mean, we both were holding back, and it wasn't until that last run that I just had that little bit of Ernie come in me, and I was plowing through and just shooting everything I could. But it allows you to take it all in and slow down. One of the things that we also did was threat doors. So we talked before about body contact, communication, right? Nonverbal communication, body contact, things like that. And when we talk about these threat doors, as if you have an open or a closed door, if you will. But you also have an angle of exposure on a different way. So you have to make sure, again, those are covered, part of the principles. So this whole threat door procedure, if you will, is having that body contact. So your plates are protecting your partner, your partner's plates are protecting you, and you both are covering those angles of exposure. But it's all about body contact and pushing hard on each other. I at first would always want a chicken wing. I'm like, okay, I'm lightly touching him, he can feel me, but it's, we talk about pushing hard. So as the person who's on the door, the assaulter and breacher on that door can move and take the space that he needs, so you can truly feel where things are going. And then he loads you up with this spring tension, if you will, and releases to go into that room for you to follow. So that was one of the things, when we talk about that nonverbal and getting that down, was not trying to chicken wing and lightly touch people. I mean, is that something that you see a lot of?
Oh, yeah. Well, and here's the thing, too, of talking about scalability of packages. All the procedures, everything that we do works in daylight, it works in low light, and it works under nods. Mm-hmm. So, like, for example, when you start doing nods work, night vision, like body contact is huge. Like that, because again, so think about under night vision, our eyesight is reduced. Our peripheral vision is lost. So how do I know where my partner is in a 3D space and what he's doing? Body contact. The more pressure that you apply to each other, the more stable of a platform you give each other first. So if somebody has to shoot, they're way more stable with the counter pressure than not. Then also, like when we're talking about like threat doors and our procedure for how do we notify our partner, we're going to go into a room, having that consistent pressure, then with the load up and the release, I know for sure he's going to the room. He's not just moving his rifle, or again, maybe it's low light. So he's ducking his rifle down a little bit to look under something, whatever it might be. It's so that, again, we are on the same page with doing everything. The more advanced that you get through this package, like again, like running under nods and 2-man with 8 million angles of exposure, it all comes back to these fundamentals. Like you have to be better at these procedural fundamental types of aspects of the CQB because they are so much more important the more advanced that you get in this. It's just like shooting. The better you are at those fundamentals, when we start getting tasks and priorities and all these things you have to do, the better your fundamentals are, the better you're going to do here. And of course, when you're up there, you have to apply those fundamentals more. But yeah, in specific stuff, I could talk about threat doors, the body contact. Yeah, the chicken wing just doesn't cut it, because I'm sure you saw it and you ran across it of, well, did my partner go? Or you'd lose each other. And so then there was this back and forth, like jig dance thing of people with guns at doors. And then the guy who's supposed to be doing work holding an angle of exposure, he's now looking over at this guy, or the guy that's supposed to be working a room is looking at his partner. What are people not actually doing? Their job.
Yeah.
And that's why body contact is so important. Anything more on that, Jesse?
Nope, pretty much covered it, man.
Yeah, and there's Kevin and Heath, and they're even telling me, Kevin's much bigger than Heath, and Heath would tell me he'd have to just jab all of his body weight into Kevin to move him around to kind of where he needed and to get space that he needed and things like that. So, then I finally realized just push the force in and that counter force, and it will counterbalance itself. And again, that during your class with Ernie, we were starting to do that, and it worked really well. So, and the other thing that we did, which was kind of introduced towards the end, again, procedures with everything is the shot shoot type procedure. And that comes down to when you're shooting across thresholds or through multiple doors or down a hallway where there's another hallway. Again, when you talk about scalability, there's another team or another element maybe on the other side of the house. If you have to take a shot, you need a way to communicate to them that you're taking a shot so they stop basically and don't come in the line of fire. This also can be done during the door procedure when you're opening a door where that breacher, who normally is not that assaulter, can, if they see something, can then take priority. So no one's crossing the muzzles. Again, it's all about that communication and procedures and knowing everything. Shot shoot is saying it that way is right. Where one guy yells shot, the other guy yells shoot, which is that command, like, got it. That first time with Joe, I would be yelling shoot, and my partner would come up to me and say shot, and he would shoot, because I was telling him to shoot in a sense. So, it's kind of a funny scenario there, but that kind of opened my eyes too, just to letting everybody know kind of what was going on at the same time, again, with the safety aspect of it.
Yeah. Again, when you have defined roles, right, you have to have a procedure to be able to switch roles. There are many of instances, right, that come up that may need to happen. And also, like you said, scalability wise, right, if we have other teams in the house, right, other members going, in the opposite direction throughout the structure or whatever the case, we've got to be able to stop the movement of the entire structure, to be able to take those shots through thresholds. So, like you said, it's definitely a safety aspect, right? And it's definitely one of those, again, communication and supporting your partner, right? It's just it flows in with those procedures and those principles.
And, we kind of covered a lot with the CQB stuff. And, I just want to reiterate the one thing that I really love about your class, especially is when we are traveling, for me, it's 4.5, hour drive, if you will. You guys are much longer than that. And there's other guys traveling from all over. And as instructors, you're letting us put in that time, right? I mean, that we're putting in, not just 6 hours, come in, have a lunch break, shoot the shit for a while. It's working lunches. We're really pushing through this stuff to get this information for 2 days. And I know even Joe's class is that way too. I mean, hell, was like 36 hours in 3 days. And for me, I love that about the class. You're getting every dollar, every penny's worth, and you're just bombarding us with that information and runs and giving us the chance to test this stuff out. So, we talked about this with the force on force stuff, but I just want to reiterate, that's one of the best things that I love about your guys' classes is the time that you take for the students. So thank you for that.
Well, where does that come from? It comes from, our mentor, Joe. But again, me and Jesse have done that. Again, we've traveled to so many classes, and it's like, okay, 8 to 5, like, what do we do after like 5? Like, go back to the hotel. Like, man, it's if I'm a student, like, I want to be there learning. I want to be doing stuff. It kind of sucks of like, all right, at 5 o'clock we're stopping, and it's like, well, I just if you spend more time driving to a class than the class takes, like that's a clue.
Well, especially in Muncie, there's not quite too much to do in Muncie or God, even though Alliance, it's like, all right, what do we do now?
Well, here's what I can tell you. Don't go to Buffalo Wild Wings in Muncie, Indiana.
Oh, Jesus.
Fuck that place.
45, 50 minutes to get the table, another hour, 2 hours later. Yeah. No. Yeah. So kind of wrap this guys up here again. Thanks for taking the time and talking about the class, and we kind of cover a lot here, and I didn't want to get into a lot of specifics again. I mean, this is truly, 2 days we spent on diving into this information, and with the podcast, you talk a lot more about each thing more in depth. But yes, is it cool to do CQB? Is it fun? Oh, hell yeah! Like if you weren't somebody who said, "I put on that carrier, put on your battle belt, throw on the helmet," like it's fucking fun, and it's a great hobby and it's awesome. But on a more serious level, am I going and taking structures like SWAT? Am I going to go? No. But it teaches me that decision making under stress, I think, is the biggest thing. That PID, picking out those targets, because I am one who carries every day, and if somebody came into my house, now I have at least tools and skills and procedures to have a better chance to clear my structure field safely and keep my family safe, at the end of the day too. So, the paper target thing, a lot of people are like, complaining about not shooting a lot. It's not a class that you're going to be shooting hundreds and hundreds of rounds, which, let's face it, 2021 right now, I don't want to be shooting hundreds and hundreds of rounds. The decision making aspect of it, at MTech, we're using UTM rounds. It's all about decision making and when to shoot, and there are times to shoot, and taking that time to hit those shots properly. But again, this is not one that you're going to be coming through, blasting through 500-600 rounds. It's all about decision making and getting these procedures down, getting those basics to build upon to do other things. So,
well, again, think about in this class, if there was no shooting, like we just had you make sounds, would you have still gotten the exact same thing out of it? In reality, yes.
Realistically, and I wanted to bring that up too, because I want you to plug what you guys got coming in. But at Front Sight down in Hinckley, Illinois, you guys are going to be doing anatomy of structure, kind of a basic class where we don't have a huge shoot house on that range, but we're going to go through these principles and procedures, or you guys are going to be. I'm going to be there as well. But we don't necessarily need to shoot. We can make the noises and still get the same information and the same level of information and thought process through this whole thing. Like you said before, Jesse, too, we need the flat range to practice on accuracy and all that stuff. But to practice this stuff, I've been practicing in my house, and I don't have my gun up. I'm just using the air rifle and just doing the procedures and hitting the corners and doing the breacher side, and now I'm the assaulter side. So it was well worth, and I, again, talk up your classes like I have with the Force on Force. It's a lot of information for real life application for everything that we do. So again, thank you for having this class added this year. So on that note, I want to kind of pass it to you guys, talk about what you have coming up, and everything like that. Talk about your podcasts, and kind of what you got going on there. I see you're actually, Nick, I want to ask you, what are you drinking? The guys, Kevin and Heath, just had their bourbon show. So what, on Practically Tactical Podcast, what do you got there?
So I am drinking Jack Daniel's.
Boo.
No, hold on. Jack Daniel's 2020 special release, rye barrel strength. So this is a special release. It is 130 proof.
Okay. All right.
So that's 65%.
Gatorade fruit punch, no big deal.
Yeah, it was very interesting what they're talking. I've never been a bourbon guy, but then just listening to it, it's kind of like, okay, now I should probably try doing it, as far as the different tastes and and how they're all different. I'm like, I was just a whiskey guy. I'm a big Jameson guy, I never got into Jack. I'm a Jameson guy, but you guys are like,
No, there's some stories. There's some Jameson stories.
So, all right. Well, I'm going to toss it to you guys. Tell us what we have coming up with Defensive Elements and the podcast, Practically Tactical.
You want to talk about the classes, Jesse?
You go for it, buddy.
Okay. So June, we have Who Are You with the Gun at MTAC. Still have spots available there. Again, if you're a type of person that's like, I want to do force on force, but I'm not ready for scenario-based training. If you carry a gun every day, guess what you're walking through? Scenarios every single day with a live gun. So that class is, again, there's the whole description on the website, but that's in June there. And again, it'll be if you've only done square range training, you're going to get a lot. If you've never done force on force, you're going to get a lot, because again, it's that close. That class is very use of force based, which I think Jesse would agree with this. Is there seems to be a lot of misunderstanding about what actually use of force is and isn't. And again, Jesse, what's the biggest question we always get, number one on the podcast?
How do I know when I can use my gun? Yeah.
So think about that. If someone out there, like, you've questioned of like, well, could I have used my gun or not? You're carrying the gun, and if you're not sure when you actually can or can't, like, actually be able to describe that descriptively, because that's what you would have to do with the police or your lawyer. Come take Who Are You with the Gun. We have that coming up in MTAC in June, Alliance in July. At the end of July, we have our kind of introduction to CQB stuff down at Front Sight. Those are sold out. And then I think we have another CQB class in November, I want to say, later in the year at MTAC. And then another Who Are You with a Gun at MTAC as well. I think both of those are in November, I want to say. October, November, somewhere in there. But we have another CQB class, another force on force class then as well.
Well, I want to say really quick before you talk about the podcast, those of you who have not been to MTAC, it is a great facility. It's indoors and it's heated. So those October, November, December, January, perfect time to go to those classes. So,
and I should mention too, almost all the classes include your ammo, include range fees. Not all of them. Some just have to be paid separate. But again, as us being students, again, me and Jesse, I mean, we're in year 8 of this or something. Like, for a while, me and Jesse were driving 2-3 times a month everywhere. We know how important it is for things to be affordable. So we've done our best to make it super affordable, include everything. That way it's just simpler and easier. Show up, the ammo or whatever it is there, and there's no additional fees or paying 2 different people. It's just one thing. It's simple, less paperwork. Let's go. We got work to do.
And then the podcast, talk about the podcast for me, Practically Tactical podcast.
Yeah, so we're coming up, I think, on year 8 of Practically Tactical. It's just on Patreon. We left the public and went to Patreon only. It's $9 a month. It's ourselves, other instructors, and we try to focus on the important stuff of this. Again, there's AARs from classes that we've taken. There's like over 50 of them you can go listen to of training that we've taken. Shows with a bunch of other instructors from combatives, low light, force on force, vehicle CQB, medical, tons of other subjects that that I forget. And the biggest thing, especially lately, focusing on is like the decision making stuff. Like, we're going to record. Actually, the Bourbon guy does a bunch of research on neuroscience, and so we're going to come on and talk about this training thing that we do. How does that work on our brain? How do we learn this stuff and actually use it? And so that's truly what we focus on, because again, it's it's none of that 9 versus 45 crap. Like, none of that crap matters. What gun you have, like whatever gun you have, can you shoot it? No. If you can't, okay, let's talk about that. Like, we did the series, with Centrifuge, the handgun series back in January. Like, whatever you carry, I don't care where your holster is, I don't care where your belt is. We can guide you through. There's tons of shows on the gear to buy, but it's all about making the correct decisions. We have a video up from Will talking about like legacy, like this movement of my finger, a little trigger pull. How many lives can that change? A ton. Myself, my family, my family's family, the person that I'm shooting, their family. Like, it, we can lose houses, families, money. All this stuff is important. So that's what we focus on is, what's the actual important stuff. And let's talk about training. That's what we do. And it's just $9 a month. And I put up a video, I think yesterday or the day before, talking about that muzzle efficiency in CQB. Yep. So we put up videos, podcasts, all sorts of stuff for $9 a month.
Yeah, and I mean, God, for $9 a month, you get a ton of information from you guys. So it was you guys just made that switch and opened up all the videos that you have, and you have the option to pay for the year too, which is pretty cool.
And you get a 5% discount for doing that.
So just
you instantly join. You get like it's got to be close to 400. I say 350. It's probably close to 400 podcasts. I don't know how. I mean, you can watch all the shows on video too, and there's probably another 50, 100 videos just on Patreon.
Yeah,
there's a ton of stuff there.
So, again, guys, I want to thank you for all the different classes that you do, coming again, talking with me tonight.
Well, thanks for coming, man.
Yeah, no, I talk about your classes all the time, and I'm trying to get more and more people to do this. Again, it's all about education. And I mean, I carried a gun for many, many years, and your guys' class in last December, Who Are You With a Gun, really opened my eyes to the flat range, made me very deficient in a lot of this stuff, and really pushed my training forward for what I'm doing now. So I'm doing these videos and talking to guys to bring more light to it, so people can see what it's about. And they're not that expensive of classes. I mean, hell, we were talking about 2-man and 1-man CQB. I just saw a 1-man class from a well-known person now out of the South, but it was $1,000 for 2 days for a 1-man CQB course, and I'm like, no.
But if I charge more money, it must be better.
It must be great, And I'm like, no.
Well, and another plug for our Patreon is, I'm sure it's going to sell out, but for $150, we're teaming up with our sponsors of our show, Defensive Elements. Obviously, this company, for $150, our Patreon people are going to have a place to stay, a free 3-day CQB class. John Hopman from Filster is going to come down and do his concealment tune-up block. So we have an awesome community of people that train. We're going to hang out together for 3 days, do 3 days worth of training for $150. Like, where else do you get that?
Well, yeah, and I've ran into a lot of cool guys too, just within the training community, and
the best thing about Practically Tactical is the community.
Yeah,
the best thing. It ain't about us or me or Jesse or Jeff or Kevin or Heath. It's about the community. We got a bunch of awesome people.
Yeah, and just everybody that goes to these training events, you get to meet a lot of cool guys and in the industry, and just normal everyday guys, and it's really a great community to be a part of. So again, thank you for everything. For everybody that's watching, definitely check you guys out. I'll have the website, the Instagram, all that stuff will be linked with this video. Again, check out the guys at Defensive Elements and Practically Tactical. Nick, Jesse, thanks again for spending time with me tonight.
Oh, always, man.
Brother.
All right, take care.